madam and my fellow classmates. We are from group 11. My name is Divyashini, bearing the metric number of 012-023-020277.
Okay, my name is Vanessa Dixon, and my ID is 012021091870.
Hello everyone, I'm Medium. I am Aunika Sutina. My ID number is 012-022-020570.
Hi, my name is Praliko. My ID number is 012-021-091-0.
Hello everyone and Miss Sugan. My name is Norhuda and my ID number is 012-021-091-601.
Okay, the story that we chose to present is Truffle, and we'll begin with.
So the first scene is a conversation by Mrs. Peters and Mrs. Hale, and Mrs. Peter will be played by me, myself, and Mrs. Hale will be played by Norhuda. Okay, so we'll start now. Oh, what are you doing, Mrs. Hale?
Just pulling out a stitch or two. That's not suit very good. Bad sewing always made me fidgety.
I think we ought to touch things.
I'll just finish up this end. Mrs. Peters?
Yes, Mrs. Hale?
What do you suppose she was so nervous about?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know as she was nervous. I sometimes sew awful poor when I'm tired. Well, I must get these things wrapped up. They may be through sooner than we think. I wonder where I can find a piece of paper and string.
In that cupboard, maybe.
Why, here's a bird cage. Did she have a bird, Mrs. Hale?
Why, I don't know whether she did or not. I've not been here for so long. There was a man around last year selling canaries cheap, but I don't know as she took one. Maybe she did. She used to sing real pretty herself.
Stinks to think of a bird here, but she must have had one, or why would she have a cage? I wonder what happened to it.
I suppose maybe the cat got it.
No, she didn't have a cat. She got that feeling some people have about cats, being afraid of them. My cat got him in her room, and she was real upset and asked me to take it out.
My sister Bessie was like that. Queer, ain't it?
Why, look at this door. It's broke. One hinge is pulled apart.
Looks as if someone has been rough with it.
Why, yes.
I wish if they're going to find any evidence they'd be about it. I don't like this place.
But I'm awful glad you came with me, Mrs. Hale. It would be lonesome for me sitting here alone.
It would, wouldn't it? But I tell you what I do wish, Mrs. Peters. I wish I had come over sometimes when she was here. I wish I had.
But of course, you were awfully busy, Mrs. Hale. Your house and your children.
I could have come. I stayed away because it weren't cheerful. And that's why I ought to have come. I've never liked this place. Maybe because it's down in a hollow and you don't see the road. I don't know what it is, but it's a lonesome place and always was. I wish I had come over to see Minnie Foster sometimes. I can see now.
Well, you mustn't reproach yourself, Mrs. Hale. Somehow, we just don't see how it is with other folks until something comes up.
Not having children makes less work, but it makes a quiet house and out to work all day and no company when he did come in. Did you know John Wright, Mrs. Peters?
So, okay, that was the first scene, which with the conversation of Mrs. Peters and Mrs. Hale. So the symbol which is highlighted in this scene is the bird cage. So the bird cage actually symbolizes in this play, the bird cage is a symbolism of Mrs. Wright's desire to have control over her own life. So Mrs. Wright, she's a woman who is constantly being controlled by her husband, and she feels trapped in her own marriage. So the bird cage here represents her desire to have some balance of her control in her life. So that is all for the first symbolism. I'll pass it to the next presenter.
Well, Mr. Hale, tell us what happened when you come here yesterday morning.
Harry and I had started to go down with a load of potatoes. We came along the road from my place, and as I got here, I said, "I'm going to see if I can't get John Wright to go in with me on a party telephone." I spoke to Wright about it once before, and he put me off, saying folks talk too much anyway. And all he asked was peace and quiet. I guess you know how much he talked about himself, but I thought maybe if I went to the house and talked about it before his wife. So I did say to Harry that I didn't know as what his wife wanted made much difference to John.
Let's talk about that later, Mr. Hill. I do want to talk about that, but tell now just what happened when you got to the house.
I didn't hear or see anything. I knocked at the door, and still it was all quiet inside. I knew they must be up. It was past 8 o'clock, so I knocked again. And I thought I heard somebody say, "Come in." I wasn't sure. I'm not sure yet. But I opened the door. And here in that rocker sat Mrs. Wright.
What was she doing?
She was rocking back and forth. She had her apron in her hand and was kind of pleating it.
And how did she look?
Well, she looked poor.
How do you mean poor?
Well, as if she didn't know what was she going to do next. And kind of done up. The symbolism mentioned here is the rocking chair, based on the scene above. The rocking chair symbolizes how Mrs. Wright who is suspected for murder. The chair is empty, showing that she's not there. It refers to how her life is lonely and how she feels now that she's lonely and her atmosphere in the house is sad. It says that what she is feeling now, like the rocking chair. That's it.
Mrs. Peters,
Yes, Mrs. Hale?
do you think she did it?
Oh, I don't know.
Well, I don't think she did. Asking for an apron and her shawl, worrying about her fruit.
Mr. Peters says it looks bad for her. Mr. Henderson is awful sarcastic in his speech, and he'll make fun of her saying she didn't wake up.
Well, I guess John Wright didn't wake when they was sleeping that rope under his neck.
No, it's strange. It must have been done awfully crafty and still. They say it was such a funny way to kill a man, rigging it up all like that.
That's just what Mr. Hale said. There was a gun in the house. He says that's what he can't understand.
Mr. Henderson said coming out that what he was needed for the case was a motive, something to show anger or sudden feeling.
Well, I don't see any signs of anger around here. It's white to here. Wonder how they are finding things upstairs. I hope she had it a little more red up there. You know, it seems kind of sneaking, locking her up in town and then coming out here and trying to get her own house turned against her.
But Mrs. Hale, the law is the law.
I suppose this. Better losing up your things, Mrs. Peters. You won't feel them when you go out.
She was piecing a quilt.
Okay, so here in the scene, the symbolism is the quilt. So the quilt symbolizes Mrs. Wright, Mrs. Wright's interrupted dreams and aspirations, and it also reflects the impact of her stifled creativity and the way society limits women.
Come to think of it, she was kind of like a bird herself, real sweet and pretty, but kind of timid and fluttery. How she did change. Tell you what, Mrs. Peters, why don't you take the quilt in with you? It might take up her mind.
Why, I think that's a real nice idea, Mrs. Hale. There couldn't possibly be any objection to it, could there? Now, just what would I take? I wonder if her patches are in here, and her things.
Here's some red. I expect this has got sewing things in it. What a pretty box. Looks like something somebody would give you. Maybe her scissors are in here. Why, there's something wrapped up in this piece of silk.
Why, this isn't her scissors.
Oh, Mrs. Peters,
It's the bird.
But Mrs. Peters, look at it. Its neck. Look at its neck. It's all to the other side.
Somebody wrung its neck.
Well, ladies, have you decided whether she was going to kill it or not it?
We think she was going to knot it.
Well, that's interesting, I'm sure. Has the bird flown?
We think the cat got it. Is there a cat?
Is there a cat?
Well, not now. They're superstitious, you know. They leave.
No sign at all of anyone having come from the outside with their own robe. Now, let's go up again and go over it piece by piece. It would have to have been someone who knew just the...
She liked the bird. She was going to bury it in that pretty box. So the symbols in this scene is the dead bird. The dead bird symbolizes oppression and stifling environment that Minnie experienced in her marriage. It also emphasizes that the bird was the only witness to the murder, but it is also murdered, which symbolizes being suppressed in ways that nobody knows what happened. And so the canary, the bird, was very, like Mrs. Hale said, it was very pretty and lively like Minnie. So it resembles Minnie and it also dies. So in a way, it symbolizes how Minnie's life was pretty and happy, but it ended up miserable and there was no witness in the end.
We do not know who killed the bird.
I knew John right.
It was an awful thing was done in this house that night, Mrs. Hale. Killing a man while he slept, slipping a rope around his neck that choked the life out of him.
His neck choked the life out of him.
We do not know who killed him. We do not know.
If there'd been years and years of nothing, then a bird sing to you, it would be awful. Still, after the bird was still.
I knew what stillness is. When we homestayed in Dakota and my first baby died after he was 2 years old and me with no other than.
How soon do you suppose they'll be sure looking for the evidence?
Okay, the symbol from this part is actually the rope. The rope actually symbolizes emotional distress and also significantly a part of discovery where you understand there's a limitation and confinement of Mrs. Pride experiencing within her marriage. And it also symbolizes where her entrapped in a shifting and opposition environment, reflecting a very big a very big theme for the story. Thank you.
Yeah,
that is all.
That is all for our group. Thank you very much.